cost of living is critical and very tough for most people in the world. And then there's a younger generation that just doesn't quite understand why you'd wait for your payday anymore.
Yeah, there's been a lot of debate on this, but I'd like to understand more on, how the younger generation would want money that they've already deserved.
They will choose companies for very different things. We know younger generations care deeply about the charitable status of a company, what companies do for people, in different ways, that they care about very different things, but they also care about how they're treated. And the most important thing that I'm hearing from them is that they just want access to their pay on a regular basis. A fruit bowl in the office, a cycle to work scheme, they're nice to have, but the most important thing I think you can give an employee, particularly in a younger generation, is just access to their money as they earn it. You must choose a provider that truly understands compliance and is compliant in all of those states. So I think that's really critical. So choose one that understands the integrations into your software so that nothing can go wrong. And the one thing a payroll team doesn't want is someone's pay going wrong. They are in charge of the opposite of that ever happening. But the other thing we don't want to do is give payroll teams any more work.
Welcome to the Payroll Powerlist by Niamo. I'm Nancy, and the series spotlights the leaders shaping the future of payroll through clarity, credibility, and real-world impact. Today's conversation focuses on how payroll leadership is evolving in an increasingly global, regulated, and complex operating environment where accuracy, judgment, and strategic thinking matter more than ever. Joining me is Sharon Kirby, Global Partnerships Director from Veep Software, a respected leader whose experience reflects what modern payroll leadership looks like in practice. Her perspective offers valuable insights into how payroll is moving beyond operations to become a trusted pillar of business continuity and employee confidence. Hi, Sharon. Thank you so much for being a part of our podcast. It is lovely going to have a conversation with you.
Oh, hi, Nancy. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Perfect. Sharon. So this podcast will deal a lot about, and specifically about earned wage access. As we all know, earned wage access is actually emerging as a critical benefit because it gives employees access to money they've already earned. It reduces their financial stress and dependence of high-cost credit. So let's get into it deeply and understand how this shapes the entire global market. But first, Sharon, is there any, what's the most eye-catching or, an eye-opening statistics or a real-world example you've come across that instantly made you think, the pay system has to change?
It's a really good question, Nancy. I mean, as you know, I've been in this world of earned wage access now for the last 7 years, working across the US, Canada, the UK, and Europe. And I think the headline, and I was thinking about this, is that 80% of all employees would move to an employer that offers earned wage access. So if there's anything that makes us sit up and listen in today's climate, where it can be hard to find, great employees, where it can be hard to reduce your turnover, if 80% of employees are demanding and would move for it, I think it's time for us to really pay attention.
Absolutely. Let's try to understand the landscape and the real need of on-demand pay. From your perspective, Sharon, what underlying financial or behavioral challenges, let's say in the US and in the UK workforce, fuels the demand for earned wage access as of today?
I think it's a number of things. I mean, I think the headline across the US, the UK, and further afield is that the cost of living is quite out of control for most people. Most people in the US and UK do not have many savings. Most of them don't have more than £500 or dollars in savings. And so that ability to have some liquidity in their lives, which businesses have, but people don't tend to have, is really critical, because unexpected bills, your gas bill suddenly doubles overnight. You know, there's just such a high cost of living. And then I think added to that, you've then got your younger generation of employees coming through who live an on-demand lifestyle themselves. They aren't from you know, the era of me, where, you know, you waited for everything. Everything now is very, very on demand, and they live quite experiential lives as well. So I think it's twofold. I think it's cost of living is critical and very tough for most people in the world. And then there's a younger generation that just doesn't quite understand why you'd wait for your payday anymore.
Yeah, so earlier when we like, you know, connected for the call, like I remember we had this conversation about generational gap, like, you know, like generations, we've all been practiced of, you know, receiving the salary from our employers every month. Like, you know, it could be at the end of the month or at the beginning of the month, and it has been a general practice. But I also, and being a part of the payroll industry, we also understand that there are a lot of companies, a lot of countries specifically, who have, you know, organized weekly payouts or on-demand pay. But you know, like, yeah, there's been a lot of debate on this, but I'd like to understand more on, you know, how the younger generation would want money that they've already deserved. So, you know, like when talking about it, like, how do you think, like, and there's also a misconception of how earned wage access also differs from traditional alternatives like payday loans or wage advances or even credit products. So why is that difference important for employers and decision makers?
Yeah, no, so again, it's a great question. I think what we always say with earned wage access, and I say this on behalf of the industry because I know so many of them now, but all an employer is doing is lifting the bonnet, lifting the lid on what really is going on with their employees, because they wouldn't usually have access to know quite how they're affording to get through a weekly, bi-weekly or monthly pay cycle, depending on where you are in the world. So I think there's some key differences. The key differences between an employee having to go and seek credit outside of their payroll is that they are credit checked. Now, unfortunately for many people, their credit may not be strong, and therefore the opportunities of how they can access money outside of their payroll may be that their only alternate is a payday loan, which we know can be at 1,300% in some awful cases. But even credit cards and overdrafts can still become quite a large cost to the employee. So having access to their pay on a more regular basis, there is no credit checking of the employees, and it's just enabling to receive their pay on a more regular basis. So that's a real distinct example, I would say, of what those differences are. And we always say in this industry, we are there to try and help people prevent bad situations. And we can come on to the fact that employees are smart people, and everyone is doing their very best to run their lifestyles, their homes, their families as best they can. But there are unexpected things that come along. So if you're working in a weekly shift environment, for example, then you may just want to take on an extra shift to know that you're going to get some of that money at the end of the day, because you've got something you need to pay for the children the next day. So there's just a reimagining of payroll, a reimagining of when you receive it. And people only take what they need. People are very sensible with their money in the main, and all you're doing is empowering them to have access to what they've already earned. So it's a mind shift for us, I think, as employers, to realize, why wouldn't you enable them to have some of that money? Employers have tried to do it sometimes. They've done wage advances, like you mentioned. Some have been fantastic with hardship loans through COVID and other times of crisis. But actually being able to put this through software and automate everything without additional, time on the payroll department, which is already usually massively overworked, has an awful lot to deal with. So I think being able to do this via software is the ultimate, really, for an employer.
How does financial stress among employees influence, let's say, productivity, engagement, and even day to day performance? And where does earned wage access exactly fit into this picture?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think we, the other thing that employers always tell me is they just didn't realize how many people were dealing with financial stress. So financial stress plays out in a number of ways. You mentioned productivity. So if you are worried about money, and so many of us have got those worries and concerns, they may be small or they may be big, it's very hard to be fully present at work. So you do get yourself to your job, but when you're there, it's in the back of your mind that you're worrying about that. Or worst case, you don't go to work because you can't afford to put the gas in your car or get on the bus or the train to get there. So actually you call in sick, but you never tell them it's because you don't have any money, because that would be very embarrassing. You say it's about something else. So it plays out in a number of ways, but we know the return on productivity is enormous when people are given access to their earned wages. And remember, this is just an app in their phone where they can see on a daily basis that they have got access to their money as they earned it. So even if they don't need it, knowing you've got additional resource in your phone on a daily basis, it really empowers you, and it takes away so much of the worry of, this is a very expensive month, what if I run out of money? Actually, I don't need to worry because my employer's been amazing and they're giving me access to some of my pay if I need it.
Let's touch base on what I just told earlier, Sharon, about
Yeah.
generations, and
Mhm.
younger generations would want
Yeah.
on-demand pay. So, how are changing generational expectations, especially among the younger workers, shaping the
Yeah.
demand for more flexible or instant pay options?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at our younger generation, and I always speak, as the mother of boys in their very late teens, they do live their life very, very differently. And they don't join a company and stay with them for loyalty for 30, 40 years, which may have happened 40 years ago. They often have multiple jobs. There's very much more a gig economy around the world now, very large in the US, large in the UK. And so I think the where earned wage access and that younger generation really fits in is that they absolutely understand that cause and effect of going to work to earn your money, to get it instantly, to go and do something that you want to do. So they live much more in a 24-hour cycle than I would say older generations like myself. So that's where earned wage access fits beautifully with what their expectations are. And the fact that they will choose companies for very different things. We know younger generations care deeply about the charitable status of a company, what companies do for people, in different ways, that they care about very different things, but they also care about how they're treated. And the most important thing that I'm hearing from them is that they just want access to their pay on a regular basis. A fruit bowl in the office, a cycle to work scheme, they're nice to have, but the most important thing I think you can give an employee, particularly in a younger generation, is just access to their money as they earn it.
Is earned wage access primarily beneficial for lower income workers, or are you seeing a broader adoption across different income groups as well?
Yeah, I always say, if you have a job and you get paid, then you should have access to earned wages, because even there are some incredible stats around people that are very fortunate and earning six-figure salaries, but they often are living paycheck to paycheck too, because the more you earn, the more you associate with your earnings and the more outgoings you have, typically. But we definitely see very large usage around, hourly workers, lower paid workers. Some of these workers might be moving for an extra 10 cents or 10 pence because it's helps them. So suddenly, if they can have access to their earnings, take on more shifts and get paid quickly, it does have a big impact. I literally was looking at some stats before our call and at some weekly workers in the US who are accessing this between 2.6 and 2.9 times a week. So in some instances, people are using it slightly like a current or checking account, where they're using it to dip in and dip out to help them get through the week on a weekly basis.
Earned wage access solutions often need like deep integration, deep payroll integrations, right?
Yes.
What do you think would be some of the biggest challenges payroll teams would face while enabling real time pay, let's say in the US or in the UK market?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would encourage all employers to spend the time and the money to make sure they've got cloud-based solutions. So to make sure they're moving to have the very best for their payroll and for their time and attendance or workforce management, because this is coming, and I'm sure we'll get onto how fast I believe this is coming. Earned wage access works beautifully when it has an integration into your payroll and your time and attendance. And by doing that, we're looking real time at what Nancy has done today and what Sharon has done today and what we can offer you. What that means is it's absolutely accurate. Yeah, so there's no cause for anything to go wrong. And the one thing a payroll team doesn't want is someone's pay going wrong. That's, they are in charge of the opposite of that ever happening. But the other thing we don't want to do is give payroll teams any more work. So by having those integrations into those solutions, there is no work. This is automated. It's run via APIs. And at the end of the week, the bi-week or the month when they run payroll, everything happens seamlessly like an umbrella over the top, and there is no additional work at all for the payroll team. So I think spending time to make sure you really have got the very best solutions the market offers enables you to treat your workers to what they are demanding now in the US and the UK.
Well, how does an employer ensure accuracy and compliance when wages are accessed, let's say mid-cycle?
Yeah. So I think, it goes back to working with a provider that can integrate directly into your system so that you know that it's accurate. And then compliance is probably the biggest part of this for the US right now. So in the US, there are compliance laws across nearly almost half of all the states now in the US. So they're either in or they're coming. A number of them are arriving in January next year. So you need to work with a provider that understands them, and they vary greatly. So if you've got staff spread across the US in multiple states, you need to know that the rules in Nevada are massively different to the rules in New York against the rules in California. There's also some rules that you're not allowed to, you need to ensure that your employee is not accessing earned wages by multiple employers. We also are seeing the advent of earned wage access being offered through financial institutions. So you must choose a provider that truly understands compliance and is compliant in all of those states. So I think that's really critical. So choose one that understands the integrations into your software so that nothing can go wrong, because never roll out a benefit that causes chaos. It should only enhance the employee experience. And then you need to know that you're doing everything right in line with compliance and regulation. In the UK, there are no regulations yet. The Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, looks very closely at the space, and there are some incredible providers in the UK who got together. I was fortunate to work with them a year or so ago, where we built out a code of conduct. So again, I think your providers in this space that care deeply about compliance are working even in unregulated countries to make sure that there is a good code of conduct to look after both employers and employees.
Yes, adding to what you just told, Sharon, there has been growing regulatory attention on earned wage access, specifically in the US, right? How do you interpret the evolving regulatory landscape around earned wage access, especially with states like Nevada and Missouri establishing the first dedicated EWA laws, right? And what kind of safeguards should employers insist on to ensure their EWA programs remain compliant and consumer friendly?
I mean, again, it's the very best of the providers, and there are some incredible ones, are putting compliance and risk of employees first. I can give an example of what we're doing. We've built compliance dashboards, so we can ingest the data of all of your employees across the whole of the US, categorize them by state, have all the latest laws on there, and show back to the employer this is what's required, because they do vary greatly. At the heart of all of them, I would say, and I was thinking about this before we spoke, is that they all demand that employees should be able to access their pay for free. So all providers should be saying there is a way for you to access your pay on demand with no charge to you. And that means they can send it to their bank with no fees at all. There are alternate fees of ways of moving it faster, quicker in different ways, but that's like a headline, yeah? So that's the first thing. So I would encourage employers to speak to the providers and say, talk me through your compliance, talk me through how I trust you to be on top of it, because it's ever evolving. I mean, there's another 3 states coming online in January. So your providers need to have compliance departments. They need to have compliance officers. You need to know that they are ahead of the curve and advising you what is coming down the line.
Do you believe earned wage access will eventually become a cost neutral or even cost saving benefit for employers?
I do. You'll be surprised to hear. Turnover it's so huge in certain things. And I was trying to think of an example to give you. So in retail, turnover is cited at between 45 and 55% a year. Now, I know from many retailers I work with that it can be way higher than that. But earned wage access, as a minimum, seems to be stopping that by 20%. So you imagine you've got 10,000 employees across retail in the US, your churn has been roughly half, at best case, and suddenly we can stop that by 20%. The savings for an employer are in the millions. The average cost of recruiting a retail employee, as stated by US stats, is about $4,000, okay? So you can see how quickly this builds up. And again, I would encourage employers to talk to their providers, work through these stats. We can forecast for you a sense of what you might save in a year. And my ultimate holy grail, which I always put out there, is I would love to see employers paying for this benefit. So of course, all providers offer a chance to move the money for free, but lots of employees need that money that day. So they're in a situation, they've suddenly realized the bill needs to be paid, or they're going to get, charged, or the children need something. If employers were able to pick up those fees for instant transfers, I think it would be absolutely game changing for employees. They would argue, how do I afford it? Again, talk to your provider to see just how much money you're potentially going to save by even offering the benefit.
Let's talk a little bit about misconceptions, shall we?
Yes.
What misconceptions do business leaders still have about, let's say, funding, fees, or risk related to earned wage access?
I think there's a number of things, and you know what? They're the same across the UK, the US, other territories that I speak in and talk to people. I think there's a worry that I always try to prefer to describe it as like a duty of care. So I think anyone in payroll or HR, they care so deeply about their employees and they take it really seriously about looking after them, getting them paid on time. So they worry that this changing of the pay cycle is going to make people behave in extraordinary ways. And it goes back to my point at the start. People don't behave any differently because it's their money. It's how they pay their bills. It's how they support their family. It's how they support their lifestyle. So I think that's the first misconception is, won't people be badly behaved by having access to the money on a regular basis? I've not seen that, and I haven't seen other providers tell me about that either. People are pretty clever about their money. They just want to access it a bit more. What was your other point, Nancy? Sorry, you asked me that, and then what was your other point there?
Yeah, so I was saying, like, if payroll leaders or business leaders have any misconception regards to fees or funding or risk related to EWA, what
Yes.
would they be? Yeah.
Yeah. So sorry. And so the other point I think that I hear a lot is that as an industry, we've always kind of blanket offered up to 50% of someone's pay access via earned wages. Now, there are ways of grouping that into smaller buckets if people have got large garnishments associated or different things with pay. But HR leaders and payroll leaders have always worried that it's a bit of a finger in the air. That sounds about right. Let's hope that works. I think what's happening now, and I would coin the phrase that EWA 2.0 is here, is that the providers like ourselves have now worked out how we can build out wellness scores for employees. We've got patent pending models. We've got people making sure they're using AI and really looking at what would it be helpful for Nancy to have access to from her pay? So is 50% appropriate, or would Nancy be better at 40% and Sharon better at 30%? So I think the evolution of earned wage access is having listened to payroll leaders and HR leaders saying, how can you help us make this fit per individual as opposed to en masse? And that's a really big evolution. But yeah, I think there's not, I think employers understand that there needs to be a free option and there needs to be a fee option. I think they understand the funding. Earned wage access providers provide the funding so that employers don't have to impact their cash. So there's no cash flow interruption at all, which would, be awful for a company to deal with, or very tricky for a company to deal with in most parts. So I think they're the key things. It's that duty of care. What behaviours might it encourage? And the answer is nothing they weren't already doing before. And then how can we really hone this to do the very best by our employees and help grow their financial wellness? And the other thing I should mention, Nancy, and going across the board, across all providers across the US and UK, is that earned wage access providers all provide financial education within their app as well. So if nothing else, people have got an app in their phone that provides them with great education that should be very localized to their state or their country, and then they will have a portion of pay available if they need it. So if nothing else, the employer is affording that employee all of that luxury in an app, in their phone, to help grow their sense of financial education.
Rightly said. When talking about industries, Sharon,
Yes.
what do you think would be some of the industries benefit the most from an earned wage access adoption? Let's say, is it retail, hospitality, manufacturing, gig work, or healthcare? And if you're choosing some among these industries, why so?
Yeah. Well, all of the above. So all of the sectors that you just mentioned, Nancy, are very high adopters of earned wage access. Healthcare is a prime example. I mean, a UK example for you is that, many of our nurses, we have food banks in our hospitals here, and that's for our nurses who care for our people who are at their sickest. And so actually earned wage access across the healthcare industry in the UK is very, very high. They're one of the biggest adopters in the UK. Ironically, they're our largest employer in the UK as well. But manufacturing, logistics, retail, hospitality, any of those sectors where you see people have the opportunity to work shifts, take on more shifts. Logistics drivers, sometimes they're required to pay for their own gas or their petrol. So actually having access to a float of money via their wages helps them a lot there. But I've also seen, we've put this into a very well-known financial services provider whose people are very well paid, very smart with their money in the main. And they were one of the fastest adopted companies I've ever worked with. And that was for completely reverse reasons. These were people that were trading, were moving money around when they needed to, taking benefit on shares, etc. So there is a reason. It goes back to my point. If you get paid, having access to your pay every day is something that just everybody wants. But you will see much higher adoption and much higher usage around those kind of hourly workers in the categories that you mentioned.
So, are you observing any interesting differences between the US and the UK adoption patterns, or let's say motivations, or any regulatory approaches towards EWA, Sharon?
Yeah, I think the UK, in most areas seems to follow the US, and earned wage access has been in the US now for about 15 years, and in the UK for about 7.5, 8 years now. We're seeing adoption levels at about 20% in the US and about 10% in the UK, but both have gone kind of hockey stick now. So there is an expectation that that this will be how everyone gets paid in the US in the next 5 years. And I think the UK will probably be 2 to 3 years behind that. Also, employers that have got people all over the world, we are seeing earned wage access offered around other countries. It's law in some countries in Europe to give people access to their advances. So there's just a number of factors happening around the world, but 100% earned wage access is here to stay. It requires providers like ourselves, because it enables payroll to just carry on as normal while plugging something in that enables them to do this for their employees. But it's a benefit that I think at first everyone thought was that's a nice to have, and I wonder if it'll catch on, and I wonder which industry will love it, to this is how everyone's going to get paid. So it's no longer about being an early adopter, it's about how fast are you getting this on your benefit grid, because if 80% of employees would move for it and you don't have it, you really need to be thinking about it right now.
Absolutely, because today I had a conversation with one of my senior colleague, and he's responsible for the country team, as in for the country Mexico, and he was explaining me how Mexico operates as a weekly payment basis. And there has been a lot of compliance around it, a lot of complications, a lot of integration that goes around it. So like as you said, it was earlier seen as a nice to have, and I think the entire workforce is slowly moving into a necessary. It's a change between nice to have, from being a nice to have to a necessary one. So I think, yes, I really second whatever you've told so far, Sharon. But in your view, is earned wage access an actual stepping stone towards a larger transformation of how Americans earn, manage, and interact with their pay?
I think it is. I mean, I have the real benefit of meeting in the US this year. I went to the Payroll Congress. I've met with many payroll leaders, software leaders in the payroll and time and attendance space. Obviously, work with you guys, and there is absolutely a feeling that this is just the future of how payroll is going to be, because you've got the demand from the employees saying, I want this and I need this. You've got employers recognizing that to attract talent, they need to change the way they pay. It's not something they can do themselves. They need the support of doing it. And then to your point, the other thing I've seen in the US and the UK is employers that are paying weekly and would love to reduce their payroll cycles to monthly, but they could never do that without having access to earned wages. So there's also a revolution happening alongside all of this, whereby weekly payroll can move to monthly payroll if earned wage access is embedded, and running well. So that's another cost saving to the employer. That's another time saving to the employer. But fundamentally, I think they've got to listen to the pester power, because 15 years old, employees moving around in the US, you're going to start to come across many, many future employees who say, I had this in my last company, I really do need it.
Absolutely. If you had to predict the state of earned wage access, let's say down the line 5 years, what would the US pay landscape look like to you, Sharon?
I will bet $10. No. I believe that everyone will get paid like this in 5 years. And I believe that because as I sit with thought leaders who talk on this subject around the world, as say people up in software companies, it's coming. It is a revolution on pay. And I've seen how well it works. I've seen how it can be quite life-saving for some employees. I've seen how when employers put it in, they don't know why they didn't do it before. So I think without question, it's absolutely coming. I spoke to a very well-respected thought leader a few months ago, and he said, I think in 3 years it'll be here. So I'm going to stick with the 5 years. But genuinely, if as an employee you don't offer this right now, you are not looking after your employees as well as you could. if I may be so bold, but also you're behind the curve. And it's tough enough running a business out there anyway without not doing what the rest of the pay landscape is. So it's here to stay. And my advice is to speak to providers and really challenge them on how they are looking at what 2.0 looks like rather than how this began 15 years ago, because it has got to be evolved, it's got to be compliant, it's got to be looking after employees, and the employer's payroll team should feel like their provider is an extension of them and helping them support and look after their employees. Fundamentally, this is about duty of care, just empowering people but looking after them. And I think that's what payroll does every day, right? So we should just be an aid to that, I think.
Lovely, Sharon. I have a final question for you. If
Sure.
you could leave our listeners with one key takeaway on why earned a wage access matters now more than ever, what would that be?
I think I would ask them to, I would share with them the feedback I've had from employers about their employees, about the employee that couldn't afford to buy things for their newborn, so they'd take on an extra hours at the weekend to another job, which they were able to eradicate when they had access to their pay more frequently. To the girl that came out of a shift at the end of the night at a bar and realized she had no money, but then could draw down her money to get an Uber home. To the people that could pay to get to work and before had always said they didn't turn up 3 times a month because they were embarrassed to admit they didn't have gas for the car. So I think, like anything in life, it is coming and it is important. It does help you attract talent. But for your employees that are really needing this, it is life-changing for them. And so I would encourage everyone to offer it. And I guarantee you, people only use it if they need it. So why on earth wouldn't you offer it?
Lovely. And that was really, really, really deep, Sharon. It was, yeah, it's a very lovely takeaway.
Oh, was that helpful?
Yes, indeed. I think this is one of the major takeaway from this conversation that I will be taking to my heart. Thank you for joining us on the Payroll Powerlist by Niamo. It's been a privilege to explore these perspectives with Sharon and unpack what effective payroll leaderships look like in today's global high-stake environment. If this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you to follow, share, and stay connected as we continue to spotlight the leaders, ideas, and decisions shaping the future of payroll, one conversation at a time. Until next time, this is Nancy signing off.